Yá'át'ééh, my relatives. Good morning. It is Friday morning, January 28th. I'm sitting down with my second cup of coffee, and I wanted to talk with you for a few minutes about consuming or navigating this 24-hour advertiser driven, algorithm delivered news cycle that we're all living in the middle of. And so I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about that. But before I do, as I always do, let me start by acknowledging, giving a land acknowledgement. So I live now in what's called Washington, D.C., and these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the host people of these lands, the people indigenous to these lands. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. And I just want to state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. So, about once a year, I sit down and go through my news sources. I Over the past 5 or 6 years, I've developed a fairly intentional method of how I get my news and the way that I go about it, and I'm very intentional to almost hunt my news, if you will, rather than just consume it. And so I go through a lot of intentional steps to get my news and to get it from different sources. And I check it for bias and other things based on some sites out there that rate news sites both on political bias and on fact checking. And then I have different ways I go throughout the day, use throughout the day to consume or to get my news. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about that because of the craziness of the news right now, and because it is fed to us so easily through our social media algorithms, which is really meant not to inform you, but to make you feel a certain way or to click on something or to consume something. And it's not really meant to inform you. It's meant to either upset you or whatever else they're trying to do, get you to spend money. And so one of the things that I'm very intentional about is I work hard not to get my news just from my social media or primarily from my social media. I do subscribe to a few news sources on social media, and sometimes I'll see the headlines go past in my streams, but rarely do I click on them. I'll usually just use them to kind of see what's going on. I use three other sources that I get my news primarily from. The first source is on my Google phone, my Android phone. I have a feature set up where I ask my phone to tell me about my day. It gives me the weather, it gives me the traffic conditions, and then it goes through about five, even up to 10, 5 to 8 minute news podcasts. And these are from some fairly, well, I start off with some fairly fact based, least biased news sources. So I, for a long time, I had AP as my first news podcast I would listen to, and then followed by NPR News Now. I've since switched them because as I was doing some testing, I saw later NPR is actually rated higher now than AP as far as their podcast and for their news. And then I listened to an ABC News headline, and then I listened to Five Things and Five Things by USA Today, as well as Five Things by CNN. And they both go through five things you need to know today. CNN actually goes through it 3 times a day. I think they do it one in the morning, once in the evening or afternoon, and once later in the evening. And then I listen to Wall Street Journal's news update and a few others. So I get, and a lot of these news sources are repetitive, right? I'll hear frequently the same stories mentioned by each of these news sources. I also get headlines from the BBC and other places like that. But it's interesting to hear how the different agencies report on the same news from a slightly different angle. And so I'll start my day usually listening to that as I'm getting my cup of coffee and starting my day before anyone else is awake. I'll just have my headphones on, listening to the news kind of brief me on what's going on throughout the day. Then the second thing that I do, and this is actually on my computer when I sit down, again, I work very hard not to just allow myself to be fed news by social media, but I work much harder to go out and actually hunt it. And so I have a list, and I'm sharing this list right here. This is my bookmarks for news sites. And I actually just went through kind of reordering them yesterday, because, again, I kind of did my annual news bias review, and I'll talk about the sites I use for that a little bit later. And I kind of rank them from most factual and least biased to least factual and the most biased. And so you'll see at the top, I have a box around the three native news websites I check frequently. Those aren't usually rated by these national sites, but I check these intentionally, again, because native news doesn't make news feeds almost anywhere, and so I intentionally go out and check native news online, Indian Z, and Indian Country Today. And then for the more mainstream news, AP is always ranked very high, extremely factual, and with a small amount of bias. And Reuters is right about the same place. Now this is where my orders begin changing, because CBS is now ranked high, BBC is ranked fairly high, ABC is ranked fairly high, the Denver Post is ranked fairly high. Now, the interesting thing about those top six categories is they all have a slight lean to the left. They're some of the least biased mainstream news sources, but almost all of those, actually all of those top six, lean slightly to the left. The Wall Street Journal, and ABC and BBC are getting a little further to the left. The Wall Street Journal is the first news source that I look at that leans to the right. And when you look at factual based news sites, there's actually not a lot of them that have high factual based content that lean to the right. Wall Street Journal is one of the first ones in the mainstream. And then I'll look at PBS NewsHour, and then I don't check all of these sites every day, but I have them listed here, and I have them ranked here from top to bottom, so that the further down the list I go, the more I'm aware that I'm checking a site that has less integrity and more bias and less fact base. And so, as you can see, Chicago Tribune is fairly high, Bloomberg News is fairly high, Christian Science Monitor is fairly high. Down towards the bottom half, we have NBC News, we have the New York Times, we have Washington Post, the LA Times, and then at the bottom we have the three, which I just refer to these bottom three as these are merely just propaganda, right? And that's CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. And the sad thing is most Americans, I don't know the numbers, but a lot of Americans use CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News as their primary news source. And if you're ever wondering why our nation is so polarized, it's because we allow these propaganda machines that are really at the bottom of the quality news heap. They're the lowest ranked news sources, mainstream news sources out there, and yet they inform the majority of Americans about the news that's going on in their worlds. And so this is, if I find something in a social media post or something that references the news, I will usually go and try to see if I can find a similar story or something about that event in either Associated Press or Reuters or one of these things ranked at the top. And then I subscribe to several of these news sources. And so I do subscribe to the Wall Street Journal because they have a paywall. I also subscribe to the New York Times and to the Washington Post. Mostly because a lot of things get referenced by these sites, and they have a fairly short limit of how many free stories you can read each month. And because there's a lot of people referencing these sites, I like to be able to read what's being said, even though I know it's from a fairly biased point of view. So then the other thing that I do, and this is what I did yesterday, and I'm going to share this with you right now, is there's a few sites I use to check bias. And let me see if anyone's commenting here before I move on. Harry, you want to come back later? Something's not working on your end. Okay, I will post this later onto my YouTube, so hopefully it will be in a cleaner version up there. Um, uh, Looks like obsolete elite is here. Thanks for joining. Joachim Patterson um, is joining here. Thanks for being on. And Brenda Giles, thanks for being on this list, or being on this live stream with me today. I'm grateful for everyone who's here with me right now. So now I want to go through some of these. There's two primarily sites I use to check news bias. One is a fairly simple one. I'm actually going to put this in the comment section right now. And let me get this in here. And this is called AllSides Media Bias Chart. And then the other one that I use, and this is actually much more comprehensive, is called AdFontes Media. And I'm going to go through both of their sites. I actually just subscribed to the AdFontes the other day because they have such a good resource, and I wanted to reference them here. And so I wanted to make sure I had some licensing to be able to do that. But anyway, let me go ahead and just review some of this with you regarding. So this first one here, if you can see this. So this is the chart on AllSides Media. And you see they primarily rate for political bias. And so you have the things that are in the center. You have AP, Axios, BBC, Christian Science Monitor, Newsweek, NPR, Reuters, The Hill, Wall Street Journal. And then you have things that are kind of left of center and right of center. You have AP Political, you have The Atlantic, Bloomberg, CBS, The Guardian, NPR, USA Today, Washington Post. And then on the right, you have a few others, Wall Street Journal, Opinion, Washington Times. And then you have the extreme left and the extreme right. And of course, this is where you'll find things like CNN, the Huffington Post, MSNBC, the New Yorker, New York Times Opinion, right? And then on the right, the extreme right, you'll have Blaze, the Daily Caller, the Daily Wire, Fox News, and other things like that. And so this just gives you a sense of where on the political spectrum does your news source lie. This doesn't go as much. I mean, they do take in, it says they don't reflect accuracy or credibility, they reflect perspective, is what it says here on this site. The other one that I use, and this is the media bias chart. And so this is what they do, and they kind of do a much more in-depth analysis where they'll look at who skews to the left and to the right, and then they'll also look at who is more factual based and who is much more opinion, or even down here, incomplete, unfair persuasion, propaganda, or other issues. And then you have things way at the very bottom here. And so the other thing I like about this is you can look at it on their interactive site. You can look at it by TV news, by websites, and by podcasts and audio news. And so this just gives you a feel. So we have AP and Reuters close to the center, and up here at the top for facts-based reporting. We have NPR up here, PBS. We have most of the major networks right kind of in here in this sweet spot, including the Wall Street Journal. We'll have right in here, if this is the center, we have them all right in this area. You'll notice here we have CNN on the web and Fox News on the web. And those are actually ranked much higher than their news channels. So we have CNN News right here on the left, like the third box down. And then we will have Fox News on television right down at the line for propaganda. So it's ranked down really low on the right, kind of towards the bottom. And so again, when you use CNN or Fox News or MSNBC as your news source, it's much better to use their web-based versions of the news than it is to use their television-based or their network-based versions of the news. But again, both sides are kind of dangerous. And then this is just their interactive site. This is their public site. So here you can see on the left, you can look at podcasts and audio, you can look at TV and video, and you can look at websites. They have the most news in here for their websites. Again, you have AP and Reuters at the top. You have your other networks in there. I'll scroll in a little bit here. Wall Street Journal over here, CNN there, Times. So you can kind of see where things are. Again, interesting when you get down to your TV-based news, and they don't have nearly as a comprehensive list in their free version. But anytime you listen to Laura Meadows or to Sean Hannity, right, you have to realize you're getting high opinion, not as factual, and sometimes actually in the case of Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity, you're getting almost blatant propaganda. The podcast, this is interesting, is CNN, our NPR News Now actually ranks really high. Another really popular newscast out there is The Daily by the New York Times. You'll see that's to the left, as well as outside of factual reporting, and it's much more in the opinion-based part of it. What surprised me, and it doesn't show on this chart, but when you look in some of their other resources, CNN Five Things actually ranked right up here with NPR News Now. And that was surprising. I actually, on my news podcasts that I listen to every morning and in the evenings, I actually had CNN Five Things ranked pretty low because it was CNN. But looking at the latest reviews of their bias and of their fact-based reporting, I saw that CNN Five Things, not the other CNN stuff, right? All the other stuff on CNN is much more biased and much more even propaganda. But their Five Things newscast is actually ranked pretty high. So I've moved that up in my list of podcasts that I listen to for podcast-based news, and that's part of the things I have on my Google. Then the third thing that I do, so if I do my news on my tell me about my day on my Google Android, and then I have my websites that I check, and then the other thing I do is I subscribe to several news podcasts. And let me just give you a little bit of idea of some of the news podcasts that I subscribe to. Let me bring this up here just a minute. It's in my podcast app. So I subscribe to things like the Global News Podcast and Potomac Watch. I just subscribed to these the other day because they were ranked pretty high. I subscribe to the Journal, which is put out by the Wall Street Journal. I do subscribe to the Daily and to The World in 30 Minutes and a few others like that. I also subscribe to some more direct political podcasts like The President's Inbox and things. And what I try to do is I listen to my daily news, the AP News updates, the ABC News Now, and those things. I listen to those probably between 3 and 4 times a day, just to stay on top of the headlines. And then I will, I'll try to listen to 1 or 2 news podcasts throughout the day if I'm out for a walk or doing something else. And then whenever I'm here at my computer and something goes by on social media, again, I'll try to find it on some of the sites I showed you that I'm looking at. The other thing I work very hard to do is I try not to share news stories from propaganda-based news sites. I actually instead try to share them from much more factual and less biased news sites. So if there's a headline that's being used to inflame people on social media, whether it's from Fox News or from CNN or MSNBC, I will usually try to find reporting on the same story at a more credible news site. And then I will share that on my social media. Frequently, I look for it first in AP because, again, for just factual-based reporting, they're one of the highest ranked news sources out there for the least amount of bias and the highest percentage of really fact-based reporting. And so again, because when I share news, I'm not doing it to inflame people. I'm doing it to try and let's talk about something. And so if I can share it from an outlet that is not trying to get an emotional reaction from people, I'm going to be able to have a much better conversation. So these are the few things that I've been doing, but I want to basically encourage everybody, right, to make sure that you're not being fed your news, right? We live in a world where if we allow our world to be shaped by social media algorithms, it so easily can be. And it's really fascinating, right? Because if you listen to people talk, and usually it's within 3 or 5 minutes of a conversation I'm having with people, sometimes even the first minute or two, and I can tell, I'm like, oh, your world is defined by Fox, or your world is defined by CNN and MSNBC. And like just based on not only what they talk about in the news, but the way they talk about it and who they end up quoting or mimicking. And you can really tell the people who allow their worlds to be shaped by either CNN or Fox News or MSNBC. And also, those people tend to be really angry. The people who have their world shaped by some of these bottom dweller news sources, they tend to be much more angry, and they tend to be uninterested or even unable to participate in kind of really open public debate about things. Um, you can tell when people get their news from a variety of sources and they're paying more attention to who is, how it's being said and what's being said, because they're much more able to dialogue about these sort of things. And so, yeah, when I can tell someone that where the world is shaped by Fox News or by CNN, and both are dangerous, right? Both are propaganda, and both are meant merely to get you to side with a certain politic and to spend your money in certain businesses and organizations. That's what they're designed to do. And because they control such a bulk of the media market, they really have a deep grip on the American public. And so I encourage people, both from the left and the right, if you find yourself feeling really angry, if you find yourself unable to participate in civil debate in a public space, take a fast, right? Fast from Fox and CNN. Fast from these sites. Don't watch them. Don't listen to them. Don't. If you find yourself listening to Sean Hannity or Laura Meadows or any of the other people, Tucker Carlson or anyone else from just doing their opinion part of this 24-hour news cycle, stop listening to them. Hunt your news instead of being fed it, and you'll find you'll be much better informed, and B, much more able to participate in civil public dialogue and discourse. And so, yeah, I really, I can't say this enough, and I can't stress how important this is, not just for the right? We all know the challenges and the bubble that Fox News creates for everybody. But the CNN, MSNBC bubble is almost as dangerous and almost as filled with propaganda as the Fox News bubble is. And so if you think you're getting the latest progressive stories on Fox News, right, it really disappointed me. This was about a year ago, where President Biden said that one of his major news sources is CNN. I'm like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be an intelligent, informed man. What are you doing listening to CNN 24 hours a day? Right? That's just, anyway, be better than that. Get your news your news from factual sources, and take the consumption of your news diet almost as seriously, or even as seriously, as you take the consumption of your nutritional diet, right? Because if we don't watch what we eat and put into our bodies nutritionally, we're going to have problems. And if we don't watch what news we put into our ecosystem, into our bubble, we're going to have problems. And if we allow ourselves just to be fed, because not only is our news advertiser driven, but it's also delivered via social media via algorithms. And none of those things are meant to inform you. That's not that Facebook isn't trying to get better informed citizens. They're trying to make money. Twitter isn't trying to have better informed citizens. They're trying to make money. And so you have to understand that when you allow your headlines to be pushed by your algorithm, you're not going to get a good rounded diet of news. I'm also going to share two other things with you. They're on a site I follow called Poynter, Poynter. And this basically gives a review or analysis of the biased sites. And so this site actually does a lot of work to have informed people. And they have a project called MediaWise, which has gotten some pretty good reviews. And so I'm going to share these with you as well in the comment section here. But anyway, this is what I wanted to talk about today. I just wanted to kind of go through some of the resources that are out there so that you can be a better consumer of your news, and therefore better able to engage in public dialogue and discourse about events going on. And if you do watch primarily, if you get most of your news from having CNN on or Fox News on in the background on your TV, if you have a daily diet of the opinion shows that call themselves news shows on those channels, turn them off. Stop watching them. Try a week. Take a week off from them and see how different the world begins looking after a week. And how much better you're able to engage with people because you haven't been kind of had your emotions toyed with and your emotions strung out for commercial purposes and political agendas by these two channels. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. Let me look through the comments here. And I would agree with Rachel Meadows and Laura Meadows. So I would, Timothy. Again, if you're listening to these opinion places, and if we go back, right, even if we go back to this this channel here, and we look at, let me go back to this media site here, right? It's the opinion pieces that are going to be far to the right. So you got New York Times up here, New York Times opinion down here. Further down, less factual and more biased. You have, your Fox News hosts way down here at the bottom on your right and at the propaganda point. And so again, you don't want to get your news from opinion people. You want to get your news from people who are fact-based and who are worried about the ethics of reporting good news. You don't want to get it from people who are there with their 1 hour news show to really trumpet their own opinion. So thanks for bringing that up, Timothy. Yeah, I hope that this was helpful to you. I encourage you to use these resources, the All Media and the Adfontes, and as well as the thing at Poynter. And I have to go get ready now because as you may have heard, I started a Patreon site a couple of weeks ago. And I'm doing this as a way to kind of hone my message and really work on creating a national dialogue on race, gender, and class. And also to kind of stabilize my income because it's 2022, the pandemic's still going on, and public speaking is not coming back very quickly. And so I'm really looking for a way to both stabilize my income as well as continue to get my message out there. And I decided to use Patreon. And so so this afternoon, actually at noon Eastern today, I'm going to be hosting a Q&A on my Patreon with my good friend and co-author Seung-Chan Ra. And so everyone who would like to join that, you can actually still do it by signing up for my Patreon at the Ask Questions tier. And Seung-Chan and I are going to be doing a Q&A today at about noon Eastern. So in about 40 minutes, 35 minutes, we're going to start that. And then we'll post it on my Patreon afterwards so people can watch it there too. But yeah, I'm looking forward to doing that. So I have to get off here now and start getting ready for that. But I hope everyone has a great day. I hope that your weekend is good and restful. If you are able to rest this weekend, if you have to work, I hope that you have a productive and efficient weekend. And we're expecting a fairly big snowstorm here this weekend, so it's supposed to start this afternoon. We'll see what happens. And I'm hoping to get out and watch the sunrise at least 1 or 2 mornings over the next few days. And I'm really excited because beginning at the end of next week, the sun will rise earlier enough that I can actually watch the sunrise and still get my daughters to school. So I won't have to miss the sunrise because I have to take my daughters to school. So I'll be able to do it a few more times a week than I'm doing it currently. Anyway, very exciting stuff. Walk in beauty, my relatives, and maybe learn how to walk in beauty together. Hook on that.